Welcome into the official Colts podcast from the NFL Combine right down here in downtown Indianapolis. I'm Jeffrey Gorman. JJ Stankevitz is here. Before we get into some football, folks, I want to keep you updated on something. If this man ran for mayor of the Combine, I think you might be in the running there. Boy, oh boy.
You ever seen Dane Brugler work a room?
I haven't, but I've seen you work a room, and there's always 6 people around you, and there's a lot of back slaps. If they have a baby, you're kissing that. I love it. Your time of year.
I love this. I love the the run-ins you have with people. I saw Nate Ollie, our old D-line coach. He's a new dad. Yeah. That was a fun conversation to have with him. I walked out of the convention center last night with George McCaskey, chairman of the Bears.
Nice.
Just chatting with him. This is great. I love this. It's a great time of year because all you do is you talk football with whoever's walking by. And you see them once or twice a year. You communicate them with them over text, over DM or whatever. But when you see them in person and you get to talk football, like for instance, one of the first people I saw here was, I'm not going to say what team this guy covers, but I walk up to him. And he just looks at me and goes, "Today's a great day."
Arizona.
And I'm like, no. And I go, what are you talking about? And he goes, "There's a player on my team who may not be on this team next year, and this guy is a bleep and bleep bleep."
See, that's the kind of stuff.
And I was like, I learned something today. Okay.
That's the kind of stuff.
All right, yeah.
And stay tuned because those are coming up later. We're going to put JJ on the spot a little bit.
I'm not revealing that one.
I mean, I know, but I'm going to say, hey, what have you heard and what has been sniffing around, people been smelling and stuff like that around the rumblings of the Combine. A good one coming up. Trevor Sikkema coming up from Pro Football Focus.
That was a good chat.
Yeah.
Good chat we had with him.
JJ sat down with them, so we're going to get you caught up on the latest of what's going on here at the Combine and, of course, the prospects and everything. And also, well, we got to go over the Chris Ballard press conference, and that's kind of where I want to start there. And so glad, obviously, we love hearing from the general manager and the head coach right there. Before we get into some specifics, were you surprised at anything you heard from Chris yesterday?
No. I mean, it's rare that you have a GM come to the NFL Combine and say something that's surprising.
Okay.
A lot of it is, I could have expected that. I could have seen it being framed this way, but you don't know until he actually says it. So the thing that made news yesterday, right, was the open quarterback competition. We heard from Chris Ballard back in January that the Colts are going to bring in competition for Anthony Richardson. Now saying this week that it'll be open, that does add a little bit more information as we kind of piece this puzzle together, what the Colts are going to do at quarterback in 2025.
Well, let me ask you this. When you say competition in the NFL, it comes to reps.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing there's not enough reps for a 3-man competition.
No.
Would you say this is definitely whoever the veteran is that they bring in?
Well, okay.
Or if it's a veteran at this point.
That's the thing is, the other thing he did say is everything's on the table.
Yeah.
And I think you got to take him at his word on that. I don't know if you're going to see the Colts take a quarterback with the 14th overall pick. That would maybe be a bit of a stretch because if you do that, you're taking that guy to start. But, I mean, you take a guy on day 2, on day 3, or you bring in someone from the outside. The thing is, you could be talking about a competition between maybe QB1A and QB1B, Anthony Richardson and someone else. But if you do bring in that third guy, because the Colts do, Joe Flacco's a free agent, Sam Ehlinger is a free agent. Yep. Let's say you sign someone in free agency and you take someone in the 5th round of the draft, we'll call it. That guy in the 5th round, he could show up to the building and they'd be like, oh, man, look at this guy we got here. Okay, let's bump him up in this competition. You never know how it's going to play out. So I don't think it's as simple as the Colts are going to go sign a veteran in free agency to compete with Anthony Richardson, and they're done. I wouldn't. And look, if that veteran, the thing with free agency, we got to remember, that veteran's got to want to come to Indianapolis.
Right.
He's got to want to compete with Anthony Richardson. So, but you also, it's a needle you got to thread where you have to convince the guy and pitch the guy, hey, we're going to pay you to come here, and you're going to compete, but that guy has to be good enough to actually compete. That's something that Chris Ballard stressed a lot yesterday, was that guy's got to be good enough to actually compete. So you can't just sign a guy just to say, oh, we got this veteran, he's going to compete with Anthony, and he comes in, and it's like, well, Anthony's clearly better than him, so there's not really a competition here. That could happen. You could still, so what I'm saying is you could get a veteran who comes in, and it's like, I don't know if that guy's really competition, but then all of a sudden here comes this other young quarterback on day 2, day 3 of the draft who comes in, and that guy's then the competition for Richardson. There are a number of different ways you can go about this. I think by the end of April, we'll have a very clear picture of what this is going to look like and then how those reps are going to get split up.
Yep.
That right there is kind of the next question I have.
Now,
the Colts have to fill out their depth chart, behind Anthony Richardson or with Anthony Richardson. But then they got to figure out how those reps get split up.
I am going to ask you something I don't know if could ever answer this, but when I'm looking at Anthony Richardson, comes in, comes in starter, comes in second-year starter. Then going into third year, I guess my question to you is how can this help make him better? Obviously, competition does, but more so that mentally, what does that do to you? They've given you the ball the last 2 years, and now they're coming in and saying, hey, we may give you the ball
this
year.
This is where everything we've heard about Anthony, Jeffrey, over the last couple of days here has been very positive. And even this goes back to locker cleanout day. When Anthony Richardson was asked directly, would you be okay with a competition? And he said, I would welcome it. I love to compete. If they want to bring someone in, I'll compete with them. If not, I'll still do the same thing. I think quarterback competitions, though, they are delicate situations because oftentimes you do see it where the guy who is the incumbent and you bring the other guy in, the incumbent maybe doesn't actually raise his level.
Okay.
That has happened. Sometimes it's happened, though, where you bring these two guys in and all of a sudden it does light a fire under the guy ahead of him. I think you have to take every situation almost in a vacuum because every quarterback is different.
Okay.
And Anthony Richardson's profile in this is very different than what we've seen in years past for your classic quarterback competition. So I looked this up. Anthony Richardson has attempted 741 passes in college and the NFL.
Okay.
Over the last 3 years, there have been 33 other quarterbacks who have been drafted. Of those 33, for our listeners and our viewers, just start thinking about this. Of those 33, how many of them threw more passes in college than Anthony Richardson has thrown in college and the NFL?
Wow. Well,
out of 33.
Okay. This is a great question, and I'm thinking, does possibly the COVID years come into this? I mean, if you backstretch.
The reason why I took the last 3 years is because that is the NIL era, where you've got this open portal, and guys are generally staying in college a little bit longer than in years past.
Okay.
However, I think if I had gone back further and looked at Anthony Richardson's, I think it's 393 he had in college, I would guess that's one of the lowest, if not the lowest, total pass attempts maybe of
those 33, how many?
28.
Oh, gosh. Okay.
So, but that's not a bad thing. The thing is, I don't want people to think that's a bad thing. That is a sign of where Anthony Richardson is in his development. Like, you think about baseball. Something that scouts will tell you in baseball is guys need, I think it's like 2,000 at-bats in the minor leagues before they are, ready to come up. It's like 1,000 or 2,000 at-bats. Anthony Richardson has thrown 741 passes in games that matter in college and the NFL. That is a low number. There are some quarterbacks who throw 600 in a year.
Wow.
And Anthony Richardson, since it's just started raining, I think, really hard on the convention center, which is why I look over and I see Casey Valier looking up what's happening here?
Case? You good?
I just watched the episode of Paradise last night, episode 7, and that was all right, moving on. The point is, Anthony Richardson, it's not a bad thing that he hasn't thrown a lot of passes. I think it's actually a good thing for this competition that the Colts are going to be running this year, because this is a team that needs to get the most out of their quarterback. We know that. But if you bring in that guy for that competition with Anthony, and all of a sudden that sparks something in him, with the lack of experience he has, I do think that can be beneficial for building him up. This isn't a guy who's got 2,000 career pass attempts and you're bringing someone in and he's like, the heck are you doing? This is a guy who's like, I welcome this. I know I'm not there yet. Something Chris Ballard said yesterday that I thought was really interesting is that Anthony Richardson's a realist about this. Yeah. He's realistic that he's inexperienced. He's realistic that he hasn't played enough. He's realistic that the Colts haven't won enough games, and he completed 47% of his passes last year. He's not hiding from that, and that's good. That is a a sign to me that a competition could have a better outcome for the Colts in 2025 than we've seen with some of these quarterback competitions in years past.
Can't wait. Chris Ballard spoke yesterday, and obviously a lot on Anthony Richardson. As JJ just said, we're coming up with Trevor Sikkema in a little bit from Pro Football Focus, and I can't wait. The worldwide game that everybody loves to play, Are You Surprised, with JJ Stankevitz. I didn't know if you knew it was worldwide and big, but it's a big one.
Yeah, you are a game show connoisseur.
We're going to play
former participant, if you will.
We did.
We did that bit.
We're going to play that. We're going to play that a little bit later, but we got more combine stuff coming at you at the thing. All right, we talked about a rookie quarterback coming in, quarterback competition, a veteran, what it goes. Now, Chris Ballard also spoke about strengthening this team. Sometimes you let players go, sometimes sign new players in, but Chris has been a guy that likes to keep his guys, and he's got some in-house free agents right now, and I want you to, he spoke of some yesterday, I want you to get your take on the Dio Dangbos of the bro. Ryan Kelly, that's an interesting tidbit that's going on. And, of course, Will Fry is the offensive guard.
Yeah. Of those guys, I thought the stuff with Will Fries I thought was interesting in that he talked very glowingly about Will Fries and the rehab process he's had, the work he's put in. And he did say, we'd like to have him back, but we'll see what the market looks like. To me, Will Fries is the kind of guy who you do want to reward internally. He's the 7th-round pick. I think was the last pick the Colts had in 2021. And he's worked his butt off. He has applied himself in a way that, has really kind of gone beyond the standard, which is kind of what you expect out of a Colts offensive lineman anyway, I think. But I think he's really elevated it. Chris talked about how he sent him to a friend in Chicago. I happen to know who that is. Chris didn't want to totally reveal who it is, but let's say that his friend in Chicago was an awfully good football player at one point.
Good.
And
Keith Van Horn. Tom Thayer.
Keith Van Horn, wasn't that the Nets player?
Yeah, great basketball player.
Yeah.
A great offensive tackle on the 85
that's
Bears
right. Yeah. But the work that Will Fries has put in the development he's had. Will Fries, when he got hurt last year, he was graded as the 3rd best guard in the NFL by Pro Football Focus, behind Quentin Nelson and James Daniels on Pittsburgh. So he was playing at an extremely high level. And the thing that I love about Will Fries is he is just mean out there. Like, you want a guy who is gonna be a physical presence on the field, which, Will, it's completely different off the field.
Sweetheart of a guy off the field.
One of the best dudes on the team, off the field. On the field, my favorite thing that he did last year was against the Bears in Week 3. He was finishing so many plays on Montez Sweat, their defensive end. He was just shoving him to the ground. Not after the play, but the play's over here. It's over
he's
where
he's
over where that the chuggo thing is over there for All City, and he's just shoving him to the ground. And finally, Sweat goes and takes a punch at him because he was getting so frustrated. But that's who Will Fries is. Will Fries is just going to be a mean SOB on the field, and I love that about him. And I think the Colts like that about him.
How does a guy like you, JJ, an insider here with the Colts, find out about, I don't want to go down a negative road, but the rehab from that, that's a major deal he had, man.
It is.
And the reason I'm asking is because this young man is up for a new contract, and that new contract is going to be a lot of money. So how do you find out the latest with, hey, how's Will Fries doing? They're not going to say anything like that. And it shows that if they do sign this man to a big contract, obviously the rehab's going well. If they don't, they let him go. We don't know. You know what I'm asking?
The impression I get is that his recovery from the injury is not a. I think this is a thing where I don't know if teams are going to be as scared off by it as you might think. Because Will Fries is a really good player, and that's why. It is not anything to necessarily do with where he's at in his recovery, how it's going. I think you just turn on the tape and you're like, that guy's a good freaking football player.
Am I on the line saying this? He's one of those guys where you say, okay, whoever signs him, whether it's here or another team that says, hey, he may miss the first month of the season, but we don't care.
I think you can live with that.
Yeah, right.
You hope that's not the case, but I think you can live with it because when he gets back out there, if you know anything about Will Fries, you're going to know when he gets back out there, he's going to be a really good football player.
Yeah.
And he's going to pick up exactly where he left off.
Let's stay there on the offensive line right now. Ryan Kelly, which I was so happy to hear Chris Ballard talked about is they still discuss, they still are in talks and everything. He's going to sit down with them face to face. And the reason I'm asking is, we're all giving back slaps and, hey, whatever happens, Ryan, you're a great guy and a great player and stuff like that. But this is a solid veteran. This is a guy that can keep that core together some. Do you think the odds are there for Ryan Kelly coming back?
I don't know. It's tough to get a kind of a read on it. Chris Ballard did say he would meet with Ryan Kelly's representation this week in Indy, and next week he'll have a sit down with Ryan Kelly. I would assume that would be at the Indiana Farm Bureau Football Center. Who knows if it'll be elsewhere. But I think Ryan Kelly's a guy who I feel almost kind of weird talking about him not being with the Colts because it's been 9 years he's been with the team. So I don't know. It's hard to kind of get a read on that one. I do think that the Colts have options. With Tanner Bortolini being able to play some center, but the Colts also have options if Will Fries were to go elsewhere, where you could play Bortolini at guard, you could play Matt Gonzalez at guard. So they've got these options on the interior in those two young guys that they drafted last year. Chris Ballard said on Tuesday he really liked the growth both those guys showed. He think they have bright futures with the Colts. So, I don't know. That's one where I really am just sort of like, I don't know, and I'm very interested to see how that plays out.
Well, how about let's stay right there. Obviously, we've been talking about Braden Smith, not a lot about his on-the-field stuff, missing quite a bit of action last season. And then Chris Ballard talks about it, said this young man still wants to play football. We don't know where we're at with Braden Smith, but that's going to play a part, I think. You better know where you're at before the draft comes on the offensive line as far as personnel goes, because you're going to have to address some of those.
Yeah, that's one where, Chris Ballard said there's no update on Braden other than, the thing about he does want to play football. He also said there's still some things you got to work through in terms of if Braden's going to be back next year. So that one very much is a look. That is not our place to discuss. Whatever's going on with him, we'll just kind of see on that front. And kind of go from there. But, I mean, look, right tackle is a very important position for this offense, really the whole offensive line. Chris Ballard talked about you don't want to be light there. You don't want to have any weakness there because that will get exploited. I kind of believe offensive line is like a weak link deal where you could have four guys who are really good and you have one guy who is a weak link on it, and that one guy's going to get exploited, and then your line may not be as good as it should be. So that, I think the Colts have a lot of stuff to figure out. What I'm interested in, this is like very in the weeds, but it's the depth. Is the depth going to be young again? Because the Colts for the last few years have had young depth on their offensive line. It's been your Blake Freelands, your Matt Gonzalez's, your Tanner Bortolinis, Dalton Tucker, those guys. Are the Colts going to go maybe a little bit younger with their starters if that's the route they take, and then have more experienced depth behind them?
Interesting.
That's kind of a curiosity I have going into free agency.
That is an interesting thought, because if you think about it, I go back to last season, Mark Lewinsky got a lot of reps.
He did.
Danny Pinter got reps, filled in at center.
Yep,
obviously,
another veteran there,
Another veteran there. So I like what you're going with. Are you riding some of these veteran guys that still have some action and play left in them?
Right.
Or?
And that's not to say your whole line is going to be made up of veterans in terms of depth, because I do think there's a really big benefit in having those young guys develop behind the scenes. And, Matt Gonzalez comes into the year not as a starter. He plays, 8-9 games, and he plays pretty well in them. Tanner Bortolini, same thing. He's got to step in, against, what was that? Cam Hayward in week 4. He's got to step in.
Though.
Yeah, and he had a really solid game there. Yeah. So I think there's benefit in those guys developing behind the scenes. The question is, when are they ready to take over? And do the Colts believe they can get the, good offensive line play out of those guys if they were to step in for a Ryan Kelly, for a Will Fries? Or do you want to keep that continuity of, hey, Ryan Kelly and Will Fries are still really good football players, let's bring them back? A lot to be figured out there. And to me, that is all that. Quarterback's the most important thing the Colts have to address this offseason. But the more and more I think about it, like when Larry and I did that show last week, I kept moving offensive line up a little more of you can't mess that one up. Because especially with Anthony Richardson probably running the ball a lot, if he is the Colts starting quarterback, And you've got Jonathan Taylor back there. You got to be able to have that consistent offensive line play, and that's going to be critical.
That's JJ Stankevitz. I'm Jeffrey Gorman down here at the NFL Combine, downtown Indianapolis. And I love talking this time of year because rosters are taking shape. Give me the goods, I say, on a young man that's going to be looking at a big contract, and that's Dayo Odeyingbo. And what he does so well in this defense, and with the new DC coming in, what does it look like if he does stick around here?
So Dayo, I thought what Chris Ballard said about Dayo yesterday was pretty interesting. That he's a guy who the sacks went down last year. He went from 5 sacks in 22 to 8 sacks in 23 to 3 sacks in 24. So those numbers did go down. He had 42 pressures last year, and actually those 42 pressures were a career high. He only had 25 pressures in 2022. He had 29 in 2023, and then a career high 42 in 2024. So I think what Chris said is, the sacks went down. Teams around the league, and he said this, other teams noticed Dayo Odeyingbo's continuing to ascend.
Yeah.
And, look, the guys like Dayo Odeyingbo usually get paid. And I don't know if it's going to be by the Colts or if it's going to be by someone else, but the way that he's played over the last maybe 2-3 years, and then again you go back to the draft evaluations of this guy, where if he didn't tear his Achilles leading up to that 2021 draft, he might have been a first-round pick. So there are probably a lot of teams that had really good grades on Dayo Odeyingbo who now might say, okay, it's 4 years later, and he's clearly past the Achilles. We're seeing a guy who's an ascending player. Let's maybe go place a pretty big bet on this guy.
Right.
I wouldn't be shocked by that. And look, if Dayo does leave, the Colts are going to have to fill out their defensive line room.
And that's where
you've got Kwity Paye coming back. You've got Latu. You got Taekwon Lewis. You got Samson Ebukam coming back. But even with those 4, it's like you kind of need like that 5th guy. That's what the room was built to be last year.
All right.
Before Samson got hurt, it was built to be that like 5-man rotation where you're like, man, that is as deep of a defensive end rotation as any team has in the NFL. I wouldn't be shocked if the Colts still prioritize defensive end in free agency and or the NFL draft just to continue to build that rotation, because look, you never know if a guy is going to go down like Samson did before the season started, and you had to fill that, but you did have good depth to step in when he did get hurt.
Wow, that's good call. Dayo Odeyingbo, we're going to figure out what's going on here, and I know it's not much on this, but the latest and greatest, we're just going to sit and wait for the EJ Speed, Julian Blackmon updates and stuff like that as far as where they are on their free agency.
Yeah, we'll see when those kind of come in mid-March.
They're just kind of going to come in mid-March. Okay, time now to get smarter, and we'll do that with JJ Stankevitz and Trevor Sikkema from Pro Football Focus, talking obviously what's going on here at the NFL Combine, the upcoming draft, and the Colts overall. Here's Trevor with JJ.
It is my pleasure to be welcomed here on the official Colts podcast by Trevor Sikkema from Pro Football Focus, host of the NFL Stock Exchange podcast. Before we started this, Trevor, we were going back and we were looking at an episode you did with Connor Rogers on NFL Stock Exchange, where you did Fix Your Franchise for the Colts. And at the end of it, you did a 3-round mock. And this is like November. So you guys obviously are locked into the draft. You're tuned into it. I think a lot of Colts fans and a lot of just NFL people are sort of like, we'll watch a little college football then.
Sure.
The guy you had mocked in the first round of the Colts was Tyler Warren, who, fast forward 3 months later, I do these mock draft roundups, and he's the guy who consistently is the most mocked player to the Colts at number 14.
Yeah.
So let's start here. Tell us about Tyler Warren. What can folks expect out of him this week? What's his profile, and why is he so frequently mocked to the Indianapolis Colts?
Well, first of all, I think when you talk about mock drafts, you talk about, having a need, right? And it feels as though the Colts offense, there's a lot of weapons that they have already, but if there's an area where it feels like they were invested in with a first-round pick, it would be that tight end position. So I think, first and foremost, the need makes sense for them. But then, of course, you look at some defensive needs that they have as well, and you wonder, all right, well, would that take precedent maybe in the middle of the first round there? But then you have to go to sort of a best player available and just overall talent approach. That's where Tyler Warren really starts to separate himself. And so you can convince yourself that, all right, let me look at tight end. And then once you do, you have a player that brings everything to the table. I think that whether it's, a T.J. Hawkinson comparison that a lot of people go to, some people love to shout out the Dallas Clark comparison as well, Colts legend.
So this is like a Y inline tight end guy.
It is, but it's somebody who can definitely play for you in line, which I think goes towards the Colts' philosophy of how balanced they like to stay on the offensive side of the ball. They like to be able to go power one moment, a little heavier personnel, but then spread it out if they want to. I think that with Michael Pittman and Josh Downs and A.D. Mitchell, and Alec Pierce, you have the guys to spread it out if you want to, go 4 wide, go 11 personnel, but then you also have times where, hey, it's 3rd and short, 4th and short, let's run the damn ball.
Yeah.
Then you've also got those players on the offensive line, and Tyler Warren would just be an extension of that. Now, the best part about him is he's able to help out both parts of the offense. He is somebody who has the frame, the size, the strength to be able to hold up in line on the line of scrimmage, but he also can play for you in the slot. He's also a great versatile receiver. Heck, he even caught a touchdown from the center position this year when Penn State was playing USC in kind of a trick play that they weren't ready for, but it helped emphasize one of their go-to players in the passing game. And I'll say this about Tyler Warren. I think the reason why we talk about him as highly as we do, whether it's a 14 for the Colts or even a little bit higher sometimes in mock drafts, is as the game of football just in general is getting faster, a lot of positions are getting a little bit lighter.
Right.
Linebackers, tight ends. We see that a lot with those two positions in particular. They're just getting a little bit lighter to get a little bit more speed onto the field. In this kind of a modern age, Tyler Warren's a little bit of a throwback player who brings you everything that you would want from the position.
But that does seem to be a bit of a trend in the NFL, at least last year, where you started to see a little bit more of an emphasis on the run game and having that bell cow running back. I think there were 6 running backs last year who had 300 or more carries in 2023. There were none. So if you can have that inline tight end who you can be in 11 personnel and you can keep Josh Downs on the field in this case, but you can still run the ball, that to me is almost more important for a tight end position. I want to ask you, though, about just comparisons to Brock Bowers. Because I think, you think about last year and the guy when you're sitting here in the Indiana Convention Center is all Brock Bowers. Could he be a top 5 pick was sort of the question for him. And obviously he went 13 to the Raiders. How do those two guys compare in terms of their skill set, in terms of how offenses would use them in their rookie year?
Yeah, just trying to think of where we were last year with Brock Bowers, because obviously you look at him and what a record-breaking, incredible rookie season that he had, and it's obvious to look at that and be like, why didn't he go in the top 8, the top 5, whatever it is? And I think the reason why is because there were a little bit of some size concerns with him. He's not the biggest tight end. Now, pound for pound, I do think that he's a good blocker, but there was some...
Was he 230 something?
He was a little lighter. I wonder if he got up to 240, 245 for the combine, but his playing weight was right around 235, 240 pounds when he was at Georgia. So he's a little bit smaller of a guy. So did teams in the NFL look at him and say, he played full-time, he played inline a little bit in college, but was he going to do that at the NFL level? I think there was a little bit of give and take there for whether or not that was going to be the case. He played mainly in the slot this season, and we obviously saw the returns on investment there. With Warren, I don't think you have those concerns, and that's why, whether it's at Indianapolis at number 4, I almost think that Indianapolis at 14 sort of feels like his floor at this point. He's somebody that would fit him a lot, but there's too many teams above the Indianapolis Colts that could also take him, where that threat, I think, is very real, and the reason is because when you look at him and you watch his game and what he is like as an inline blocker and just the overall size that he has, you're running out of reasons to not pick this guy. And so if the Colts obviously can get a player like that at number 14, they'd be really pumped up about it. He would win, I think, in more inline ways than Brock Bowers would, and probably in a little bit less of ways. I think I have to say that because Brock had a record-breaking rookie season when it comes to that slot receiving ability, but both of these guys bring so much to the offense.
So in your latest mock for Pro Football Focus, you had the Colts trading back with the Chargers, picking up an extra, I think, 2nd and 5th, swapping 4ths, and taking the cornerback out of East Carolina, Siobhan Revel. He's coming off an ACL.
He is.
Is that right?
Yes.
So what about that, just that thought process led you to say, maybe the Colts will kick back here. They'll take a traitsy defensive back who is coming off of a significant injury.
Yeah, so there's a lot of things to go into this. First and foremost, when it comes to the trade itself, I look at this draft, and I think a lot of people look at this draft and say the strength is going to come on day 2, right? It's not flooded with blue-chip talents. It's like we don't have 10, 12 blue-chip guys that are headlining this draft. There's some good guys that are going to be great football players. Obviously, we talked about one of them in Tyler Warren. But I think when you look at 4 or 5 years from now, when we look back at the 2025 NFL draft, I think the teams that quote-unquote won the draft are going to be the teams that really nailed those second and third round picks because they're going to make up so much of those rotational starters, those depth players that really made out the core of their team and really was able to raise the floor. So I think that Chris Ballard, who I have a lot of respect for his scouting in mind and how he goes about the NFL draft, I think he realizes that too. And right now, they don't have any additional day 2 selections. But if you think about trading back a little bit, maybe getting an extra one of those guys, if the Colts front office and Ballard believes that, the strength or the lasting impact of this draft is going to come from having more of those round 2, round 3 picks, especially if you're picking guys in the trenches, I think that could be a move that really intrigues them when they come on the board at number 14. And again, especially if maybe Tyler Warren's off the board at that point, they start calling some teams about some guys who have fallen. So then you get into where I had them trading back with the Los Angeles Chargers, still the early parts of the 20s, I believe it's pick number 22, and I had them taking Revel, who, very talented cornerback, late breakout type of a player. He's going to be one of the older corners in this class. He's going to be 24 years old on draft day. He's coming off that ACL injury, and normally when you get higher age, coming off a major injury, maybe you stay away a little bit, but this guy is so crazy athletic. I mean, there are plays that I watched of him earlier this year where, okay, the timing and the technique of him playing in press coverage, that definitely needs work. A wide receiver might be able to get off the line of scrimmage a little bit cleaner than you want for a guy who has his kind of strength and length. But then if that receiver gets even up the field, Revel flips his hips, puts his foot in the ground, and it's almost like he overruns the wide receiver. Like, that's how good of recovery speed and how good of an athlete this guy is. He's got great ball skills to him as well. And so there's things that you got to think about with him as a prospect. But holy cow, it's hard to not look at him and think this is a ball of clay that could be an all-pro corner at some point.
How do you think about mock drafts, like putting those together at this stage of the calendar? Are they thought exercises, or are they like, this is what I think will happen?
I think right now they are more thought exercises for me. When I think about mock drafts, yes, I want to stay within the realm of realism. I don't want to, lead anybody astray or anything like that. But I do. I think I had 4 or 5 trades in my most recent mock because I'm exploring opportunities to see, all right, well, if it's not as consensus of rankings as it has been in years past, then why wouldn't we think there could be some movement in the first round? Here is who I think might be willing to move up or down when it comes to the NFL draft. And I really reserve those mocks in April. And especially, before free agency, it's really hard to do a mock draft based on what you think is going to happen.
Right.
Because there's so many signings that are going to happen around the league that impact what teams might have and who might be on the board. So I think all of those things go into it. So I reserve sort of...
Now, last year, you could have done a mock draft where the Falcons just signed Kirk Cousins and you'd be like, they're not going to take a quarterback.
And that's, you know what? That's a great point. Maybe we should have stuck with the pre-free agency mock drafts. That's what makes covering the draft a lot of fun because you never know what's going to happen with things like that, which is hilarious because on draft day, we probably thought, what the heck are the Falcons doing? And now a year later, we go, whew, they're kind of glad that they did that. So, yeah, I think that they're more thought exercises right now. And then when we get into April, it's a lot more about, hey, here's where what I really think is going to happen.
You said that this year's draft is more geared toward kind of those day 2 depth guys. Is there any connection to more veteran players entering the draft because of NIL and because of the portal and there being more of that depth? I mean, you're talking about Revel, who's 24 years old.
Yeah.
Maybe in a previous life before NIL, maybe he is a halfway decent third year, and he's like, I'm just going to come out because I want to get paid sooner. But now you have more of these older prospects. We are kind of past the COVID opt-outs, but with guys being able to go back to school and play another year and not miss out on money, does that have any impact on that?
Yeah, I think it does. I mean, it's an interesting thought, and I think it's going to be something that we're going to be able to look back and sort of study here is, we always gravitate towards those younger players, those underclassmen, because we think that, you look at this guy and you go, okay, well, he's not the most technically refined, but the ceiling is so high. Well, in this class, it's a little bit more of, hey, these guys are a little bit more polished, and I wonder if that is why we are really looking at that day 2 to say, hey, I can already envision so many of these guys being productive pros because the baseline of their technique and how they approach the game is at a level that you feel good about drafting. And you can see them as sort of, the phrase plug and play is sometimes used a little bit too much because anytime you're going from college to the NFL, it's a really hard thing to do. But it's easier to see that with some of these older prospects who have played a little bit more, started a little bit more, and you could see them at least filling out your roster and rotational roles for sure.
All right, put on your GM hat. What's the one thing, or maybe the most important thing, you think the Colts need to do this offseason?
I think that it's improving the secondary, right? I think that they had some talented players in the secondary. They've had some injuries, some guys in and out of that lineup, not just this year, but over the last couple of years. And it was just too up and down for them. It really was. I think they've done a lot of really great stuff on the offensive side of the ball. Certainly making sure the offensive line is as stout as it has been. I know Ryan Kelly's obviously an upcoming free agent. Will Fries is as well. So kind of figuring things out along the offensive line, making sure that unit is good to go. But you like the pass catchers. I like the options that they have around Anthony Richardson. I think he is set up well enough to really take a next step and be somebody who, if it is in the cards for him, it's there this year to be able to do that. But on the defensive side of the ball, I just felt like it was a little too up and down for them, specifically in that secondary. They had some big moments, but the floor to me was too low when the wave was going up and down. So getting a couple of new secondary players, getting a new lineup at there, whether it's a safety or corner, I think it's just paramount for this team.
All right, last one for you, Trevor. I know you're a Florida guy. You're a big Anthony Richardson guy. You have been in the past. Let's catch up on him. Sure. Where are you with Anthony Richardson right now? You talked about the infrastructure being in maybe a pretty good place. Where are you with him specifically and his ability to take that next step that he needs to take in year 3?
Make or break year. I mean, there is no doubt about it that this is the make or break year. I think that it's been divisive because there is reason to say, hey, it's not all on him. There are things that were outside of his control, and then there's also stuff on the other side where it's like, yeah, okay, he could have handled this better, or maybe you would want to see a little bit more growth for him. The fact of the matter is, he only started 1 year when he was at the University of Florida, only had a handful of starts before he gets hurt, so he's rehabbing through the injury, he's getting that, and then obviously last year, the roller coaster of sort of, him getting benched and then him being back in the lineup. What you're hoping is that you are hoping to set up the most stable situation where you get this player to start for a full year for you, so at the end of 2025, you have a definitive answer to the Anthony Richardson question. So, yeah, that's kind of where I am. I still think, obviously, Richardson has all of the talent in the world, but I'll also tell you that right now the consistency has not been good enough from him. So this really is the make or break year for him, and I'm excited to see what happens.
Good stuff. Trevor Sikkema from Pro Football Focus and the NFL Stock Exchange podcast. Appreciate your time, man.
Thanks, anytime.
Big thanks to Trevor Sikkema from Pro Football Focus. Wrap it up. Tie a bow on that interview for me. What we got?
I feel like the Colts aren't as far away as some folks might think.
Who's saying that?
Talking to Trevor. Well, I mean, look, Chris Ballard, he was right about this, that he said the Colts aren't close.
Right.
We're not close.
That's right, the GM did say
that. But I don't think they are as far off as a roster as the sort of just like mediocre last 2 years where you're literally a 500 team may indicate. I think that this team's got a lot of good players. You drop a great player into this team, or you continue to bolster it, or you get great quarterback play. There are different avenues for this team to really ascend. And, yeah, just listening to Trevor, I kind of feel like he sees it that way. And that's encouraging that someone from the outside, with a fresh perspective, also kind of sees it that way.
Check him out at Pro Football Focus. Big thanks again to Trevor. JJ, like I said, you wander around here. You talk to a lot of people. You're doing a lot of stuff. You're interjecting with other. I mean, just before we get to Are You Surprised, which is a fun segment that you know nothing about yet, but it's going to be fun, I promise you. What are you finding out around here? Like, let's start, what's the Colts at 14? What are they looking like?
Well, I mean, you talk to the draft experts here, and a lot of them are just going to default to, one of the tight ends or a defensive back. That's kind of the default. Now, that doesn't always mean that's how it's going to play out. A year ago, I think you looked at it and it was like, okay, you've got, you got the Colts looking at maybe a wide receiver, maybe a tight end. I don't think anyone was talking about a defensive end. And then that pops up. They take Latu with the 14th, with the 15th, whatever it was, 15th overall pick. So it's hard to kind of gauge where anyone's at right now, just because you don't know how free agency is going to play out. And if the Colts were to take a swing at one of those positions, then that might lessen the immediate need for the Colts to go out and get a guy with that high of a pick. But, yeah, I mean, you talk to a lot of people. You keep hearing Tyler Warren's name pop up as a guy who's a really intriguing player. Daniel Jeremiah, he was on our podcast yesterday. He got a video coming out with him where he unprompted, these guys start talking about him. if he's going to be there at 14. We'll see if the Colts go that direction. It is way too early to tell, though, if he's a guy who the team's even interested in. I mean, that's the thing is, like, we don't know anything. I'm just, this is hot air.
Right.
I have no inside information on that. But talking to guys, and most of it right now is just sort of thought exercises of like, if this team does this team could do this. This team does this team could do this. And sometimes those get completely blown up on draft day by an unexpected thing, like I was joking about with Trevor with Michael Penix.
Yeah,
so
right.
You never know how it's going to play out, and you never know who's going to be available when you're picking. And you won't honestly know that until you get called on the clock on April 25th. So I could sit here and say, look at this guy, look at that guy, but just start getting to know a lot of the names, and then when we get closer to the draft, maybe it'll narrow, but maybe it won't. We'll see.
All right. It's time, man. It is time. People have been waiting for this. They've been logging online since last night. It's called Are You Surprised with JJ Stankevitz. Number one, are you surprised if Chris Ballard signs 4 free agents this offseason?
No. I mean, I think
that's not his MO. That's why I'm asking it.
But so 4 was actually the number he signed in 2023.
I meant 5. How about 5?
All right.
No, stay there at 4. Are you surprised?
No, because I think you go back to what he said in January about creating competition and kind of creating that friction around the roster.
Okay.
And I think that has to come from outside free agents in a way, where you got guys who you do want to keep around, but if you're looking to build competition and kind of build that healthy tension within your roster, that sometimes that does mean you need to go out in free agency. I don't know if that means the Colts are going to go be the top spender in free agency, because that's not their MO, and that doesn't usually work out for teams being the top spender. Usually you're the top spender because you suck at drafting and you have to go fill those holes with expensive free agents.
Right.
The Colts have not, they're nowhere near that point in terms of drafting. So I think you bring in a couple vets, maybe you make a trade, maybe some of your draft picks become that competition, but whatever it is, I think you're going to see a lot more competition across the roster. And I think the thing that Chris has brought up multiple times is last year, the Colts didn't make a move at wide receiver in free agency. They didn't. But they drafted Adonai Mitchell. And, Chris tells the story of how Alec Pierce walks into his office after that and says, what does this mean for me? And Chris tells him, nothing, go compete. Look who made the biggest stride in 2024. It was Alec Pierce.
You're right.
And it started when they brought in competition. So that right there tells you, I think, you bring it in through the draft, through free agency, whatever it is, you got to create that competition on the roster.
Okay, more Are You Surprised with JJ Stankevitz. Are you surprised if the Colts bring in a veteran tight end and don't address the tight end position at this draft?
No. Because you don't know how the draft's going to play out. And, the thing is, bringing in a veteran tight end, that is the number of guys who can be that Y tight end, which is the inline guy who him being on the field is not a tell for passing or throwing. The Colts last year, they frankly had some tells with the guys who are in there in that inline spot of, if you're going to pass or throw with Mo Alley-Cox or Kylan Granson on the field, because that's what those guys were good at. Mo Alley-Cox is a really good run blocker. Kylan Granson's a good pass catcher, but they didn't maybe have the crossover that you need to be a little more multiple when you have those guys on the field. The thing is, finding those guys is really freaking hard. It's really hard to do. So it's not as easy to say you can just go find that guy in free agency, go find that guy in the draft. I think tight end's going to be really interesting, though, because you got Drew Ogletree coming back, you got Will Mallory coming back, Jelani Woods is coming back, but he hasn't played since 2022. Right. Will Mallory didn't play a whole lot last year. Drew Ogletree played 40% of the snaps. And then Mo Alley-Cox and Kylan Granson will be free agents. So that room could have a lot of turnover in terms of the personnel and then in terms of who gets to play, because maybe this is the year Will Mallory gets more snaps. Maybe he is more consistently on the field. Or maybe this is the year the Colts take a big swing at tight end in the draft or in free agency, and that room kind of gets blown up a little bit. I don't know. We'll see. That is a fascinating room, though, going into the offseason. More is going to be revealed in the upcoming months, obviously, and we're winding down with Are You Surprised? Are you surprised, JJ Stankevitz, if the Colts draft a quarterback before the 4th round? No. Okay. I would
explain
probably...
that. The reason I'm saying that is, explain please for our viewers, if that's the case, is he automatically into the competition if a veteran...
Yeah, I think that's the thing, is if you take a guy on day 2, you're expecting him to probably compete.
Yeah.
But, I mean, look, we've seen teams do this before. We saw the Eagles draft Jalen Hurts when they still had Carson Wentz on their roster.
Yeah.
And that was done to spur some competition, and it wound up working out great for Jalen Hurts and the Eagles. But for Carson Wentz, it maybe didn't work out for him in Philadelphia. I think you got to do what's right for the team. and what's right for that position. And if that means you really like a guy in the second round or the third round,
go
take him.
Yeah.
You have to do what's right. And I think Chris Ballard has always operated that way in terms of, even if this is maybe controversial a little bit, or maybe it's not the most popular thing to do or the sexiest thing to do, sometimes you got to do it. And that might not be the thing that gets you all these plaudits from fans, but it might be the right thing to do. So
plaudits? Plaudits. Good call.
Yeah, thank you.
Good call.
Yeah.
$13 word right there, brother. I don't use plaudits a lot.
That's a sandwich at Shapiro's you owe me now.
That is, plaudits. I'll tell you what, last Are You Surprised? Are you surprised at how many steps you get in at the NFL Combine?
No, let's see. What am I at right now?
Where are you at right now? What did you finish up with yesterday?
Okay, all right. So yesterday... Now, this was
also...
A
lot of walking around here, folks. A lot.
All right,
Big
so
place.
I'm at 5,000 right now.
Nice.
At 10:45 when we sat down for this. Yesterday, I did 15,000.
Attaboy. That's a good run. 15,000 steps.
Yeah, 15,000 steps.
Wow.
It just, wearing out the walk from Radio Row to the Starbucks at the JW Marriott.
Sure.
And, good rule of thumb at the Combine is a 10-minute walk will take you 20 minutes.
Why is that? Oh, just crowds?
You run into people.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, you run into people. Oh, hey, good to see you again. Yeah, well, back slap. Yeah.
What do you think? Can we stick? Can we keep Are You Surprised around?
Yeah, let's keep doing it.
Does it have a little flavor to it?
Yeah.
All right, let me. I'll doll it up a little bit.
You got to salt bay it a little better.
Yeah, I'll flavor it up a little bit. So thank you to Trevor Sikkema down here at the NFL Combine, and thank you for your time. I know you got to get out of here because there's more info to be gathered right here. Follow him on Twitter X at JJ Stankevitz. Lara Overton, usually part of this official podcast. She will be back next week because she's running around crazy like everybody is here. Colts.com has the latest. His Twitter has the latest. Be sure to follow everything that you can on Colts.com and the latest with the NFL Combine. It's getting juicy. Players are starting to put the shorts on and get on the field, and we're going to bring you the latest every day with updates. For JJ Stankevitz, thank you for today.
Absolutely.
Good stuff, buddy. Good stuff. I'm Jeffrey Gorman. This is the Official Colts Podcast.